Good morning. I'm Justin Sampson, Chief Executive of Barb, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this morning's Barb briefing. At our last event in June, we welcomed 4 industry leaders. Verica Djordjevic spoke about how Barb data inform Channel 4's windowing strategy. Vicky Fox of OMD focused on how our emerging data for SVOD and video sharing platforms will deliver critical new insight. Ruth Cartwright of Sky Media brought to life how our BVOD planner combines with C-Flight to enable total TV planning and reporting. And Emma Moorhead demonstrated how Barb data flow into Wavemaker's proprietary planning tool. If you missed the event, it's still available to stream from our website. We also announced the award of new research contracts that confirm the commitment of the UK advertising and television industry to Barb until the end of 2029. Understanding people is at the heart of our remit, and this need to understand people, not just devices and distribution, is why we need a high-quality panel of homes at the core of our service. And the great news is we committed to the largest ever increase in our reporting sample, up to 7,000 homes, which is close to 16,000 people. And our service is not just about having a panel. Our audience ratings are underpinned by the integration of big data. Since 2015, we've independently collected and audited a census count of viewing to BVOD services, and we harness these device-based data with people-based data sourced from that great panel we have, which represents the breadth of UK society. Today's Barb briefing focuses on another major step forward. This is a defining moment for the industry that relies on our services as we introduce SVOD and video sharing platforms into our daily audience reporting. Over the years, we've constantly been dealing with the arrival of new platforms. Online streaming services are the modern iteration of this, and we've been determined that our audience measurement should embrace these services. We started reporting audiences to broadcasters' streaming services 6 years ago in 2015. Today, we introduce daily audience reporting for SVOD and video sharing platforms. And this means that the advertising and television industry has, for the first time, independent, objective and transparent measurement of audiences to these streaming services, even without their active participation in Barb. And this development reflects our commitment to deliver a comprehensive picture of what people watch, and our determination to embrace streaming services such as Amazon Prime Video, Disney+, Netflix, TikTok and YouTube. To bring this to life today, we're delighted to be joined by Rosemary Newell and Neil Mortensen of ITV and Jon Manning of Starcom. After I've shared some headline numbers from our test and build phase, Rosemary and Neil will give you a broadcaster's perspective on this development. Then Doug Whelpdale, our Insight Manager, will unveil fresh information on the programmes people watch on SVOD services. And then we will hear from Jon Manning, who will give an agency perspective. Then we'll have the science bit. Doug will return with Jim Jarrett, our Research Manager, to explain how we deliver these viewing figures. And Doug and Jim will then host a live Q&A session. If you have questions as we go, please submit these through the Q&A feature, which you should see on your Zoom screen. Depending upon the number of questions we get, we aim to be finished by 9:50 and certainly no later than 10 a.m. Working with new techniques developed by Kantar, Barb has been building towards this day for a couple of years. During our test and build phase, we've generated preliminary insight which gives you a flavour of what you can expect to see as the data start to flow on a regular daily basis. Let me share some headline findings before handing over to Rosemary and Neil. We now have a new definition of total viewing. Total identified viewing is made up of 3 parts: total broadcaster, total SVOD AVOD, and total video sharing. And you can see that broadcasters clearly account for the majority of viewing through their linear channels and BVOD services. And the TV set is dominant for both broadcasters and SVOD AVOD services. This reflects people's desire to use the biggest screen available to watch professionally produced long-form content. In contrast, smartphones account for 49% of viewing to video sharing services such as TikTok and YouTube, which isn't surprising given how easy it is for people to watch short-form content on smaller devices. We also have confirmation of the big four streaming services: Netflix, YouTube, Amazon Prime Video and Disney+. Let me pick out just a few points from this chart, which looks back over the last 15 months at how many people watch these services on a TV set. The proportion of all aged 4+ watching Netflix on a TV set during the course of a week briefly topped 35% in February. Since mid-September, Netflix has consistently returned to this high watermark. Might this be a Squid Game effect? We'll hear more on that later from Doug. You'll see two notable peaks in Amazon Prime Video's reach last December. These are when the service had streaming rights for all 10 games on a Premier League match day. It has another match day this week, including the tantalising prospect of Everton versus Liverpool. We look forward to reporting the audience for this and other matches. And the reach of Disney Plus grew notably during October 2020, when it closed its linear channels for children, and again in February when it launched Star as an additional strand of branded content on the platform. And here we can confirm speculation that some streaming services' viewing levels are driven by their heaviest viewers. The 80-20 rule applies to YouTube and Prime Video. That's 80% of viewing, accounted for by just 20% of viewers. And here we see the characteristics of those heaviest viewers. There are probably no surprises that it's young adults and children who are the heaviest viewers of YouTube, TikTok and Disney+. We also know when people are watching the streaming services. Collectively, SVOD, AVOD services enjoy their highest audiences in the evening, which suggests healthy competition with the broadcasters. But that said, total broadcaster viewing peaks at around 20 million in the evening. So there's some way to go for the SVOD streamers, which peak collectively at around 4 million. You'll see a marked difference for video sharing services, which as a category has a peak-free viewing pattern from 9 in the morning until 11 at night, except during the school day. This doesn't mean these services aren't being watched during the school day. It just means they're not being watched at home. So there are a few findings to start with. I'm scratching the surface. Turning on the supply of these new data is possible because of our constant attention to doing things properly. Due diligence on methodologies and rigour in evaluating the outputs are part of the fabric of Barb. We need to ensure we're introducing developments that adhere to the principles of joint industry currencies: independent, objective and transparent. Now let's head over to ITV, where we're going to hear from Rosemary Newell, Director of Content, and Neil Mortensen, Director of Audiences. And first of all, we asked Rosemary why she thinks these data are so important to a broadcaster like ITV.
So the reason that the new data is important to us as a broadcaster is that we have to have a total understanding of what's happening in the UK television market. And, you know, the way in which people have been viewing television has changed so dramatically. We all know this. There have been loads of new entrants into the marketplace, and people's behaviour have changed as a result, particularly during the pandemic, of course. You know, I think roughly speaking, people watch about 4 hours of television a day. That's been the case for the last few years. Maybe that will be the case for the next few years. But the makeup of that 4 hours that's changed so dramatically. And at the moment, Barb measure all of that information, but we get a blob of data. We don't have a full understanding of what's inside that blob. We call it the yellow bit. This is all down to Neil. It's the next font on his graph maker, so that when we look at the information, we call it viewing to the yellow bit. And as I say, that started when it was all quite small. Now the yellow bit is very significant, with Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus and all the other new streamers coming on board. So what the new data will give us, and why it's so important, is a proper understanding of the components of that lump, basically, so that we can see where people are spending their time. I think one of the global streamers were quoted as saying that their greatest competitor was sleep. You know, we have to get people's eyeballs, we have to get their attention, and understanding what they're doing across their time, and how much time they're spending with all of our competitors in the marketplace is absolutely critical for commissioning decisions, for scheduling decisions, for marketing decisions, for running as a broadcaster.
I mean, the information is incredibly important for our studios business. Like everybody else, the new streamers and new entrants to the market are, of course, after the next big breakout hit. And of course, for our studios businesses, that means that they become some of our most important customers. The other thing that we, of course, noticed, and I think everyone knows, is that there hasn't been much data delivered from the new streamers. And when they have delivered any data to us, it's been a bit patchy. They've changed the methodology along the years. So we're kind of working on scraps as a business, and we really need that information to make sure that we can, fight for a commission, or of course fight for a recommission. So the information now are like-for-like information, television metrics that our studios businesses can understand and can relate to, become incredibly important for that business to sort of flourish and for us to basically make more telly and sell more telly to the streamers.
Well, the new route meter will give us a lot of information on the on-demand side that we simply don't have at the moment. I think one of the issues that we grapple with is that when we're trying to understand the full picture of people's viewing, we're kind of comparing not apples and apples, but apples and elephants. You know, we don't have a single source where we can decide and look at what has been the viewing path across all devices, whether it's live, VOSDAL, 1 to 28 day catch up, or indeed pre-TX. So, all the broadcasters are trying different experiments to try and attract the attention of the viewers, whether that be putting drama box sets all out as a single experience after the first episode has aired, windowing differently, previewing on VOD, etc., etc. So what we need to be able to get to is a really, really full picture of how people have been viewing, who's been viewing, who's started to use the on-demand experience first. Is it the lighter viewers? Is it the younger viewers? Are they new viewers to those streaming services, and so on? So I think the new data will really help us to get a much, much fuller picture of not only our own on-demand viewing, but also our competitors too.
What's going to be really fascinating for us is understanding much better the journeys that viewers are taking, not just across our services, but across everybody else's services. So we can really start to track from when they press the remote for the first time to when they press the remote for the last time, whether they are, previously, because of the yellow bit, we understood that they were watching perhaps some ITV or some Sky, some BBC, and then they're just watching something else and we didn't know what that was. So for us, it's just vitally important that we understand these journeys right the way through. So I think our analysis will improve, it'll become easier, we will just start colouring that yellow bit in.
And around the business, I think it's fair to say that we ask Neil and his team a lot of what seem like quite simple and straightforward questions, but actually the data at the moment are not allowing us to get that single answer. So hopefully in the future we should be looking at the possibility of getting a single piece of information which covers all patterns of viewing across all devices. Yeah.
The other thing that I think we'll notice a change in is the way we report our literally just our performance of all of our shows day by day. We, as a TV business, have basically lived and died by the overnights. It literally sets the tone for the whole day in the building and has done for a long time. Everyone can be really excited and happy, or everyone can be really depressed. So I think that, it will start to change the way that we report these data day by day. It's still really important for us to understand exactly what happened last night. And we have so much live telly that we really want to understand, again, the very next day what's happened previously. But we know that so many people are watching shows over such a long space of time. Again, as Ro was saying, watching them even before they've TX'd on linear. So I think our overnights will change. We'll still have something which looks at last night, but with this new information coming through, we'll be able to have lots more bits of information that will show how shows that have built up over time and just help decision making and help the company get used to a different kind of currency. On first look, I think you would think that this is not a new measurement that is going to have a lot of commercial applications. But I don't think it could be further from the truth. There's a couple of things that really come to mind immediately. First of all, we have a lot of our clients and a lot of our agencies want to really understand Netflix audiences, Amazon audiences. Okay, at the moment they can't actually. There's no advertising to those audiences, but they still need to understand them as a planning audience because there are certain things about those audiences that they want to understand. And they want to understand where they're going and how to attract them. Secondly, I think particularly with the BVOD analysis, we'll be able to get a much better understanding across different types of devices and different types of screens on the reach of our shows and the reach of different types of audiences across our shows and across devices. So we want to understand more and more how many people are using, for example, Love Island on linear, and then they go, or Love Island through the hub on their mobile or their laptop. So we'll get much better, more precise information on that too.
I mean, we are offering our viewers a lot of choice. That's the point. We want to be able to provide content for people whenever and however they want to watch it.
Yeah.
So I suppose what we're now saying is that in order to properly understand that choice, we need the data to be able to make better decisions, having reflected on all the choices that we've given people and how they've chosen to take those up.
Yeah. And for us being able to do that with a data set that gives us like-for-like measurement is the most important thing.
My thanks to Rosemary and Neil there for bringing to life why these data are so important to broadcasters. Justin showed some headline viewing figures for new categories SVOD, AVOD and video sharing, alongside some individual services. In the next 6 minutes, I'll bring you up to speed with how we can help you understand the SVOD programmes that people choose to watch. Looking at the most viewed SVOD programmes for October, we see a number of films released in 2021 throughout the chart, as well as a throwback to 1993 with Hocus Pocus on Disney+, demonstrating the importance of some gently spooky Halloween viewing to the UK at the end of October. The latest incarnation of Cinderella is Amazon Prime Video's highest placed programme, ranking outside the top 10 at number 47. Finally, we see the much talked about Squid Game from Netflix topping the chart with an audience that would have placed it 10th if we included viewing to programmes from broadcasters. You may have expected to see the likes of Friends or Grey's Anatomy on this chart. They are absent because we're finalising the editing rules with Kantar while these data were gathered. These rules ensure that viewing to programmes available on both SVOD and linear channels is assigned to the right channel or service. In the live data, you will be able to see these programmes and where they were viewed. If we add in programmes viewed on linear channels, we get a sense of where the audience is to SVOD content ranked. We see that Squid Game achieved the 10th largest audience in October. Unsurprisingly, the list is headed by British TV stalwarts Strictly Come Dancing from the BBC, Channel 4's Great British Bake Off, and a nostalgic reboot of The Darling Buds of May from the Larkins on ITV. Heading beyond the top 10, we see another entry from Netflix with The Guilty's audience of 3.1 million sitting between Heathrow, Britain's busiest airport, and Our Yorkshire Farm. Black Widow is the top Disney Plus programme with an audience of almost 2.3 million, making it just above Escape to the Chateau on Channel 4. Finally, we see Cinderella from Amazon Prime Video with an audience of 443,000, just behind a rerun of Rocky IV on ITV. In the spirit of fairness, I should add that Cinderella launched in September when its audience would have placed it second in the SVOD only chart. Returning to Squid Game for a moment, we can see that it took a little while for audiences to catch on. Firstly, looking at reach, we can see that just under 600,000 watched in the first week after release, 1.7 million in the second week, and just over 3.1 million in weeks 3 and 4. This accumulated to a reach of 6.6 million over the first 4 weeks. We can also see interesting movements in age profile. 16 to 34-year-olds dominate the first week audience, before children come into the mix more strongly in week 2. Notably, older age groups catch up a little later in weeks 3 and 4. Justin raised the possibility that Squid Game might be helping to maintain weekly reach of Netflix above 35%. By looking at what Squid Game viewers had watched in the 3 months prior to release, we see that only 3.2% of them had not watched Netflix at all. So while it may be a factor, our data do not point to Squid Game as being responsible for a significant portion of Netflix's growing reach. Next, we can take a look at viewing to Emma Stone's Cruella on Disney+. The data here show the proportion of audience reached by day from the point of release in late August to the end of September. With audiences free to choose exactly when they watch the film, it is interesting to see the importance of weekends to audience build. After the first week, most days add no more than 3% to the audience reached by that point, while Fridays, Saturdays and Sundays are adding up to 6% even by the fifth weekend. The data seem to demonstrate that established behaviours, in this case enjoying a reboot of a family classic at the weekend, hold true when viewing this kind of content from SVOD services. As we see viewing patterns we recognise from films, sporting events offer us viewing profiles we recognise. Justin mentioned that Amazon Prime are screening 10 Premier League games over the coming 3 days. When these data become available, we expect you will be able to see how closely an Amazon Premier League audience mirrors a Sky Sports one. For now, we must look at the last time this happened. In December 2020, 1.8 million people watched Liverpool and Tottenham play what would sadly no longer be a top-of-the-table clash. The data here show the profile of viewing to these games. As you might expect, they show a more male audience dominated by those aged between 25 and 64. Given that Amazon are offering commercial opportunities around these games to media agencies and their advertiser clients, these data will no doubt be of particular interest. The nature of video sharing services presents a completely different challenge for Barb. With an extremely long tail of content that is largely user-generated, we will report at a top-line service level rather than for individual programs or pieces of content. Nevertheless, we see the impact of prominent events such as early morning peaks to YouTube in March and May 2020 as the nation got moving during lockdown by watching PE with Joe Wicks. Interestingly, we can see the May peak is much lower than the March peak. Much as New Year's resolutions to use the gym fade over time, even Joe Wicks couldn't keep as many people exercising 2 months after the initial interest. What is interesting to us is that our Wi-Fi router meters are able to capture this genuinely human behaviour and reflect it so clearly in the data here. More recently, on the 29th of May this year, BT Sport again made the Champions League final available to view via its YouTube channel. The yellow line you can see here clearly follows the pattern of a football match, with 2 extended peaks of just over 45 minutes and a dip at half-time. The later, smaller peak corresponds to the time at which the victors were raising the trophy. With these data we are drawing inferences, but in the newly released data we will report broadcaster content viewed via YouTube from day one. These are just some examples of what you'll be able to do with our new data. You'll also be able to examine video streaming services like TikTok and Twitch, albeit not at a content level, alongside a host of other SVOD players. Hopefully you've seen what you recognise as like-for-like metrics that will give you a good understanding of SVOD and video sharing audiences that were, until now, part of the yellow bit on Neil's charts. Now for the agency view, I'm pleased to welcome Jon Manning from Starcom.
This new router meter data from Barb is really important to us at Starcom and Publicis as a whole, as well as all other agencies, because we can now start to get a real view on what was previously reported as unidentified viewing. Unidentified viewing has been reported by Barb now since 2014, but in some cases, for adults, unidentified viewing is now at 27% of all time in front of a TV. When you start looking at younger audiences like 16-34s, unidentified viewing actually accounts for 60% of all TV viewing for that particular demographic. Now, with this new data, we can start to get a handle on what that 60% for young adults or even 27% for all adults actually is. It's no surprise really, we thought a majority was going to be driven by the SVOD services here at agencies, the likes of Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney+, and that is definitely the case. But there are certainly instances now, because Barb are measuring all devices that are video capable within the household, that we can start to have a look at the likes of YouTube, TikTok, and all of the longer tail video services that previously we had no idea how they were performing, and we can start to then benchmark how those services are performing versus normal linear TV. So it's really, really interesting now when it comes to media planning. We can start to see how maybe a YouTube campaign would stack up next to a traditional linear campaign, and well beyond that as well. So it's really, really interesting for agencies to be able to start to have a look at the whole video space and understand exactly how it all fits together from a consumer's perspective. It's also important for the future of the linear TV channels, as it gives them an opportunity now to get under the skin of what audiences are doing when they're not watching linear, and how they may be able to entice them back to a linear schedule, be that specific commissions or programming decisions moving forward, to help them identify exactly what it is that people have been drawn to in those other services, and how they may be able to replicate that in a commercial space, which again feeds back into what we deem important at agencies, and that's finding people in advertising environments at the right time, so we can deliver them the right message, that's why this data is so important, so we can continue to deliver that for our clients and keep on top of how the industry evolves. This new data does give us sight of all of the video space, commercial and non-commercial, and there are benefits to both. Obviously, with SVOD being such a large part of this new identified viewing from the router meter data, you would argue that maybe there isn't so much value for agencies there. But that said, we can actually look at who is watching Netflix and Amazon Prime, Disney Plus. We can start to build a profile of who that viewer is, what is that audience, and where we can actually reach them in commercial spaces. That may be on a linear TV set, but if we can start to understand that audience, we might be able to find them outside of the TV space as well. We might find that they might have a propensity to consume social media, so we might want to use Facebook or something like that. So it basically gives us a window, an insight into that audience that have become more elusive in the linear space, and where we can find them in other media channels that present commercial opportunities to us. But from a commercial perspective, this new data does report on AVOD services, advertiser video on demand. So that does give us an idea of how large that opportunity is for us and the audience that are consuming those opportunities. So as I've previously mentioned, the likes of YouTube and TikTok and other players in that space, it really gives us a chance now to see what they offer of a combined video plan on top of linear, or even what it would do just all by itself, and also not to mention the fact it's by device. So this now allows us to have a full picture of how people are behaving in and outside of commercial spaces, so we can make sure that we produce rounded AV plans to make sure that we can always reach them in the right environment at the right time. So we can start to understand how media is consumed on different devices. No surprises that YouTube is largely consumed on mobile phones and not so much on the large screen TV, which then has an implication in terms of creative recommendation. Do we need to reconsider what potential copy would run on the likes of YouTube? Because we know that the majority is watched on a smaller screen. Does the TVC that we run in linear have a place still on that YouTube plan, or should indeed the TVC be adapted for the smaller screen? I think this information, with this new data, really gives us an opportunity to dig into the consumer behaviour to make sure that we are not only reflecting the media habits in our media plans, but also adapting any creative and delivery of that creative to the consumer in the correct way as well.
In November 2021, Barb introduced SVOD and video sharing measurement. Let's look at how we know what people are watching on these services. There are two technical solutions for understanding the programs people are watching on SVOD and video sharing services.
So firstly, how does Barb measure the overall usage of SVOD and video sharing services? Well, we can now measure this, the reach and the total time spent using VOD services and video sharing platforms such as Amazon Prime, Netflix, Disney Plus, and YouTube, thanks to what's called a router meter. Now, a router meter is installed in Barb panel members' homes attached to their home Wi-Fi router, enables us to understand all of the streaming that runs across that network, and means that we can measure their viewing across all four different screens in the household, so TV sets, tablets, PCs, and smartphones. The list of services that we measure are agreed with Kantar and with Barb, and we restrict ourselves to only services that can be streamed as video services. So we don't collect any other information, for instance, on their banking or social media usage. What we'd like to show you next is a brief video put together by Kantar, who run the Barb panel, which is designed for panel members for them to understand exactly what the router meter is and how it works.
It's no secret that television viewing has changed over the past decade. There are a wealth of ways to watch TV programmes, whether that be online or via different devices that can connect to your TV. As technology continues to develop, how Barb measure television viewing also adapts and evolves. So we've created the Focal Meter, a discrete box that connects directly to your broadband router and collects viewing information from all devices which use your network. The Focal Meter is designed to measure what you watch online, either as it is streamed or after you have downloaded it. The Focal Meter is only designed to measure your viewing of online video. It will only capture and report your viewing of online video from a prescribed list of broadcasters and other video services. This is known as the whitelist, and you can see exactly which services are included in the whitelist at any time. The data collected by the Focal Meter is then processed and aggregated with all the data from other households in the panel before being passed to broadcasters and TV companies.
So that's how we're explaining to panel members what the router meter is doing in their home. Secondly, how does Barb measure SVOD programme viewing? We can also report programmes viewed on TV sets for the most watched SVOD services. That's currently Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, and Netflix. This employs an audio matching technique, which is similar to the way in which we reference audio for linear broadcast channels at the moment. And what's actually happening here is the monitor that's attached to the TV set is picking up the audio from those programs and it's matching it back to a library that Kantar hold. Now, Kantar are currently building up that library to include 60,000 hours of content by April 2022. After then, we'll be adding at least 10,000 hours of new programming each year.
The great thing is these two technical solutions operate in conjunction. So we know from the SVOD program measurement the content that's being viewed in the household, but we don't necessarily know how that's being delivered. And that's where the router meter comes in, so that we know precisely which platform is delivering that content to the household. And that's really important because for certain types of content it's available across more than one platform, and the router meter gives us that tiebreaker to help us decide who exactly is delivering it.
So that's a look at how those two solutions are operating alongside one another. Now let's take a run through some questions about SVOD and video sharing measurement. Firstly to you, Jim, what type of information is actually collected by the router meters?
Well, Barb, its underwriters, and Kantar Media agree a list of services that are tracked through the home router meters. It's really important that we only track streaming services and we completely ignore any other information that's running through the home Wi-Fi network.
That makes perfect sense. I mean, panel members' privacy is a key concern for Barb. So secondly, when we're talking about viewing to SVOD and video sharing services, are we also measuring viewing which is taking place away from the home, so off of the home Wi-Fi network?
Right. Well, the short answer to that, Doug, is no. Clearly, we're only measuring the stuff that's running through the home Wi-Fi router. And in fact, that makes our streaming measurement actually really similar or identical to the way that we measure TV viewing in the home. Barb's only interested in what you're watching on the TV set in the home. There is one exception to this, though, and that is for services that agree to take Barb and Kantar Media's tag, and that enables us to understand viewing of panel members outside the home. Because the tag delivers that information back to Barb and to Kantar, enables us to measure this.
Makes sense.
Your turn, Doug. So why are SVOD programme ratings only available and only measured on TV sets in the home?
Well, so this goes back to the SVOD programme measurement system, which we talked about a little bit earlier, and the fact that it relies on an audio measurement technique. This can't be used on non-TV set devices because it requires the cooperation of these services to tag their players. So the tags that you just talked about in terms of the ones which the broadcasters use, if a service isn't currently participating in Barb measurement, they don't have that tag on their players, so we can't recognise when people are using them off of the home Wi-Fi network.
Great answer, Doug. And finally, how does SVOD and video sharing measurement start to affect Barb's definition of total television viewing?
Well, it does mean that we have a new definition of total television viewing, and we're calling this total identified viewing. There are 3 constituent parts to it. The first part is total broadcaster viewing. This is time spent watching linear and broadcast channels as well as their respective BVOD services. Secondly, we have total AVOD and SVOD viewing, and then finally we have total video sharing viewing. All of these are measured across 4 screens through a home Wi-Fi network. Total broadcaster viewing also includes out-of-home viewing for tagged services, which we have talked about.
Yeah.